Okay. So I think it's time for us now to start this session. So welcome back, and thank you all for joining this session today. So this is the Just Transition session has been organized together with IEEP and Zoe Institute. I'm Chiara Antonelli. I'm head of program on climate and circular economy at IEEP, and today I will be guiding you through this session. So before we start, I'd just like to remind that, yes, this is the Just Transition session again. There's been some confusion and miscommunication before, but I hope now this is clear. We will be having, of course, questions later, and one of the way to do that is actually to scan the QR code and check auditorium, and then you can pose your questions. Of course, questions can be voted, and then the ones that will be the more burning topics, let's say, can be read out loud. And then for the other things, there will be Elena actually joining us with some mic duties and passing through the mic on the room. Okay, and curtains close. And while we do that, so I'd really like to remark once again the importance and the crucial point that we're going to discuss today, which is very hot in the agenda, and that is just transition. So we've heard today a lot of time, actually repeatedly, about just transition, social justice, equality, equity, and so forth. So what I'd really like to do now is to invite our panelists here to join me on the stage, and our also introducer, Elizabeth Dirth, and then we will go through our session. So please, by all means, join us here on the stage. We have this very diverse and rich panel with us. And the first thing I'd like to do is to give the floor to Elizabeth Dirth for some introductory remarks. Elizabeth is the managing director at Zoe Institute. So as I said, Zoe is co-organizing this session with us. And Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Chiara, and thanks for giving me the chance to and the task to open this panel. Of course, this topic has been alluded to across many different moments over the course of the last day, and is obviously a critical topic on the agenda that has risen really quickly over the last couple of years, and justifiably so. We've seen many examples of people who feel left out of the green transition, but also at the same time, we've seen decades of underinvestment in our social institutions, our social infrastructure, often the ramification of austerity policies and politics. And these institutions have faced immense pressures as well at the same time over last years. Of course, the pandemic being the most obvious one, but there are more. And before I go in to talk a bit about some of the dynamics of the just transition and why we're here and some of the challenges to set the scene for the discussion we're going to have, I want to start by doing something that's a little bit unconventional in this setting. And I want to start first with a thank you. So there are literally thousands and thousands of civil servants, some of which are here in the room. I see you, some of which are also sitting next to me, that are working extremely hard on a fast, emerging, dynamic, challenging policy area that is the just transition. And they're not only building an entire new policy field at the moment, they're building a new way of working, they're making up for the mistakes of previous policies and the way they were implemented, and they're also at the same time trying to make up for an underlying economic model that's not designed to center people and planet. And all at the same time, this is a thankless, relentless, complex, unwieldy task, and this huge group of civil servants all around Europe and all around the world are brave and brilliant people, and in so many local authorities and regional authorities, they're isolated, alone, and overwhelmed at the task at hand. And this conversation today wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for so many of these heroes who are willing to do this work. And while, of course, we can celebrate lots of the think tanks and the CSOs and the thinkers and the thought leaders on this topic, it's also important to celebrate those people because they are also the engine room of the just transition. And of course, I'm going to come to dissecting some of the failures of that, but considering the long journey that we have ahead of us on this topic, on implementing a just green transition, I think a little bit of gratitude also helps us all persevere. And I feel, so I personally feel really lucky to get a chance to work with so many of these pioneers on a daily basis, and I want to start with a little bit of a story of a recent interaction with one of them to get deeper into this topic. So a couple months ago, I was discussing the topic of social cohesion in industrial policy and the potential of industrial policy to deliver social cohesion across Europe with a member of Cabinet Ferreira. And we were talking about the cohesion fund specifically. And this person said to me, what good is a community center or a cinema that's funded by the cohesion funds if no one lives in that region anymore because there's nowhere to work? And then they told me story after story of rural depopulation in the region that they're from, and throughout emphasizing questions like, why is there no work there? Why did the industries move? Why did the populations move? How are demographics and community needs changing over time? Many, many, many questions, none of them actually about the green transition, none of them actually about the European Green Deal. And there's a whole plethora of questions about social cohesion and particularly on this issue that don't necessarily take the Green Deal or green transition as a starting point. And I use this example to start and the story to start to illustrate exactly that and to remind us that the just transition isn't just about the green transition. It's also about the just transition in the context of digitization, in the context of the modernization of industry, in the context of demographic change. And I start with this example second because building a just transition is also so much more than bringing social equity into the green transition. And we need to also look at the root causes of what is making the situation unjust to begin with. And often in circles like these that tend to be a bit more dominated by environmental actors, when we talk about just transition, it's actually code for, and sorry, this is a bit crass, we're worried about the backlash to the green transition and our inability to implement the green transition because we did some things in the process that are a little bit socially insensitive, and we learned that we need to integrate social concerns into environment and climate policy, and that's our starting point. And this leads to then a collective call for coherence in the policy process. We need to figure out how to bring social into green, and then we'll be able to figure it out. And that's all well and good, and don't worry, I'm going to come to my critique of the policy process and policy coherence. But first, I want to start again with that context and that story that I started with, which is that to talk about the just transition means to talk about the deeper and broader economic transformation that is afoot, to get to the bottom of why industry is moving, how to create good jobs in diverse regions around Europe, how to ensure a good life for everyone, and all of that within our planetary boundaries. And to do that, we also need to look at and understand the root causes of, again, why is it unjust to begin with? Are we expecting to be able to pick an apple when we planted an orange tree? Or in the case of my example, are we expecting people to repopulate a rural area because we build a school, but we actually haven't invested in any jobs? And if we want to be able to pick apple trees, we need to decide 5 years before to plant an apple tree. And so then I want to ask the question, what are we planting today for tomorrow? And now I'm going to start talking about the policy cycle because this at Zoe we are deeply into and have been working for the last couple of years on this. And for us, this is about the how. How do we start planting the seeds today of the future that we want tomorrow? And I want to start about the policy cycle and talk about the incredibly unsexy and sometimes uninteresting part of the policy cycle, which is planning. Planning is like the waste collection of policymaking. No one really wants to see it. They don't really want to see it happening, but they're really, really, really unhappy when it doesn't happen and when it doesn't go well. And you can ask, for example, the residents of Glasgow who, during the last COP couple of years ago, the waste workers went on strike because of their conditions and there was waste all over the city at a time when the city wanted to champion its environmental work. So I want to talk about 3 things that haven't gone so well in the policy process that have led to us facing the challenge of the just transition, and then talk about a couple of solutions to that, and then I'm going to also leave the discussion to the other panelists and the rest of you for diving into that more. So first, planning transitions in our economy is incredibly difficult stuff. And I think that perhaps we made the initial mistake of thinking that the green transition was possible without acknowledging that it was a whole economy transition and what the scale and the pace of that was needed for that. And sometimes this resulted in setting targets as if they were going to deliver themselves without a plan or interim steps to get there. And now we need plans, we all know that. We need accountability for those plans, and we need those plans to be economy-wide. And we need, underneath all of those plans, the mentality that the long term starts today. Second, sometimes we've used the wrong tools for solving the problem. And often this is because the problem is deeper than what we are actually currently looking at. In my story, you can see an example of funds supporting communities, which of course the funds may be delivering really critical services or infrastructure for those communities, but they're maybe not getting at the root of the problem. And the just transition requires us to examine, as I've said a couple of times, the root causes of what's causing injustice to begin with. And we needed to not create exclusion, injustice, disillusionment, and then realize it afterwards, and then try to fix it retrospectively with, for example, some investment or funding later. And too often, funds are centered around this, and then when people inevitably get left behind, because of course it would be insane to think that a fund can deliver everything for everyone, everywhere, all at the same time, some people are truly left behind. And the last, and perhaps most important point, which I've been dancing around a little bit, is that all of this is ultimately about time. It's about how much we have of it, how we think about it, how we plan on what timescales, and also our timing of the things that we do. And a lot of the conversation about policy coherence tends to be talking about either bringing social into green or bringing green into social. And there's a lot of critique of there not being coherence or coordination, but actually, at least in the EU context, there's a lot of coordination processes that exist. Inter-service groups, inter-service consultations, other ways of inputting on files as they're being developed. But often there's a lack of time to do it well, and I've heard some horror stories about some particular groups getting 6 hours to look at the Net Zero Industry Act, or skipped impact assessments. And also, it's important that that feedback and that coordination across different sectors happens at the right time, and often it's happening too late in the process. But we also, related to time, need to talk about the time scale and how and when we think about the time scale. And I know this is a little provocative, but I would argue that actually we've often been thinking too short-term on social policy issues and too long-term on environmental ones. And actually we need to walk this transition hand in hand and not racing to keep up with each other. For example, we have the renewable energy capacity now that we invested in 10 years ago, but we also have the care and education systems that we invested in 10 years ago. So I'm gonna start to wrap up. I saw my 1 minute mark, and I wanna leave us with the question of what do we need to do now? And I want to make an important distinction before I start to answer that. Is the just transition primarily a new policy domain, or is it primarily a new way of making policy, or is it both? Of course, I would argue that it's both, and I think we're going to go on to discuss that. But I make this distinction because I think too often we're lumping these two things together and then not able to get the question or the answer we need to both sides adequately. So when it comes to new ways of policy making, I think we need to start with changes to our existing ways of working. That means thinking, planning, acting more in the long term, and particularly marrying the timelines of how we think about social, economic, and environmental policy areas. It also means time for coordination across policy areas for this to go well. And when we start to imagine some new ideas, maybe that's new ideas around participation, so like a standing panel of citizen representatives that can be asked responsively and ad hoc and dynamically about policy files as they're being developed. Maybe it's also a commissioner whose responsibility is to think in the long term and be accountable for safeguarding transitions. Maybe that commissioner can also ensure that if we want to have apples, that we're actually planting apple seeds. And so we were developing actually a new version of Policy Cycle 2.0, which outlines all of that in a lot more detail. And to answer the last question about what other new policy domains, of course, we need to be talking about the implementation of the green transition, sure, and the relationship to other key policy areas like industrial policy, health, or skills. How that transition is helping lift people out of poverty and deal with social exclusion, how it's helping celebrate diversity, and what new policy frameworks we need for all of that. And I think that the people to my left are all going to talk to many of those topics as well as many more over the rest of the panel. So thanks, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And now I'd like to start the first round. It will be an introductory round, and it will also ask you to answer a very broad general question. So this is, what does it mean to have a just transition, and why is this important according to your expertise? And I'd like to start with Ella. So Ella Huys, she is a climate policy expert at the Federal Climate Change Department of the Belgian Presidency. So Ella, you have the floor. In 5 minutes, what does it mean having a just transition, and why is this relevant?
Thank you.
Yep. On.
Thank you, Chiara, for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as you already said, I work as a policy officer at the Belgian Federal Climate Change Service, and I'll maybe start with your question on why. So, why is having a just transition important? Well, a just transition will be essential to the success of the green transition. So, we won't have a successful green transition without having everyone on board. And with having everyone on board, it's something that has different layers. So, first of all, we have the layer of the labor market. It's really related to, for the transition, we will need a workforce. And the workforce will need to have the right skills to make the transition happen. And I'm thinking of the production and installation of net zero technologies, but also of critical infrastructure, specific skills related to the circular economy. And within our climate change service, we commissioned a report on the implications of the climate transition on jobs, on employment, and on skills and training in Belgium. And it showed exactly that the availability of skilled workers is a bottleneck for the green transition. But to also focus on a positive note, the green transition will have a net positive impact on jobs in Europe. But we must not forget that this positive impact will not be distributed equally. The impacts of the transition will impact different sectors, but also people and regions differently. And therefore, it is important to plan ahead, just as Elizabeth mentioned in her introductory speech. It is important to plan ahead and look at, in relation to the labor market, this is substantial potential for reskilling there is. Public authorities have a crucial role to play here in offering reconversion support to workers. They have a key role in facilitating job reconversions and also in ensuring the availability and affordability of reskilling programs. And these programs should be developed in coordination with industry, but also with social partners. Their participation will be crucial to boost the uptake of these training programs, and thus we must enhance collaboration between public and private entities. A second layer about having everyone on board is about the public support and also the social acceptance of the transition, which again will be essential to its success. And in that regard, greater awareness of the benefits of the transition is key. I'm thinking of the opportunities of job creation, but also co-benefits like the benefits for health and the impact it will have on public finance. A third layer, in my opinion, is about affordability, because we won't get to climate neutrality if people just cannot afford the sustainable choices that are out there. I'm thinking of sustainable housing, mobility, the clean products we have out there. So we should really avoid creating new inequalities by striving for inclusive policies that integrate both social and environmental goals, and very much integrating stronger social dimensions in the transition policies and how we design them. So to end my introduction, I'll answer also your first question, what does it mean to have a just transition? And to me it means that the costs and benefits of the green transition are equitably shared and that the most vulnerable people in society are protected.
Thank you very much for your first points. And I'd like now to introduce and leave the floor to Maria Nikolopoulou. So Maria is Vice President of the Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment section at the European Economic and Social Committee. Maria, same question, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chiara. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Maria Nikolopoulou. I'm a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. For those of you who do not know the institution, we're a consultative body to the other bodies of the European Union. So we have representatives from the whole spectrum of civil society, the workers' representatives, the business associations, and environmental NGOs, farmers, consumers, you name it. It's a very diverse group, and that's the beauty of it, especially because when we issue an opinion, which is the core of our business, we build it on consensus. So as you can imagine, our opinions, nobody is quite happy with them, and nobody is completely unhappy. But one of the things that it's crystal clear for everyone in the committee is that the European Green Deal is one of the most ambitious and more transformative endeavors that the European Union has ever put in place. And the target of carbon neutrality by 2050, it's valid. And we are not discussing about if we need to achieve it, but on how. And for us in the committee, the cornerstone, the center of the achievement has to be people. We have talked already a lot about social acceptance. We have spoken a lot during the day about the farmers on the street. But this is not new. Do you remember 5 years ago the Gilets jaunes that also went on the street when the whole thing was starting? No? And of course, it's a controversial movement. But still, it was triggered precisely by the legislative policies. Now, we know that not everybody can afford to have a sustainable life. Not everybody can afford to produce sustainably. And if we put the people in the dilemma to see if they can make ends meet by the end of the month or the end of the year, or if they want to save the planet in 2050, unfortunately, they will choose the short term. And this is why it's important to have their buy-in, to get people involved, to have a meaningful participation of all the stakeholders so that we can plan the way ahead, all of us together. If we don't manage to distribute equally, equitably, the gains and the losses of the process, it will be a collective failure. So everybody has to be on board. And either way, social acceptability that also reduces the public discontent comes with a meaningful participation, but it will also give democratic legitimacy to all the policies that we are discussing, and also a better understanding of the European Union and how it works. On one hand, we have people saying that everything is too slow. On the other hand, we have people saying we have to review documents in 6 hours. The Commission says it takes too long because we are consulting the stakeholders. The stakeholders are saying, no, we're not consulted. So it takes time. It takes time, but we need time, and everybody has to be on board there. Another link that it was already mentioned in the morning, and I really want to echo on that, is the direct link of the Green Deal with the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it is a commitment, the achievement of the Agenda 2030. If we work a little bit further on the social aspects of the Green Deal, it will become even a better tool to try to implement the Agenda 2030 strategy. Although at the moment it's not completely clear on how we're going to do it, but an overarching strategy needs to be there as well. So, leaving no people, no persons, and no places behind, which is becoming the motto of the European Green Deal. And lately, it's more of a buzzword and more of a patching actions rather than actual actions embedded in the systematically in all our policies. And this is why in the EC we are calling for the development of a comprehensive and integrated EU framework that will pave the way of the journey ahead. And we have elaborated an opinion on just transition by the demand of the Belgian Presidency, and I will maybe tell you a little bit more about that a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. So now I will turn again to my right and to Mikael Leyi. So Mikael actually is the Secretary General of SOLIDAR. And same question again to you, and I leave you the floor.
Thank you very much. And on the end note, perhaps, because for SOLIDAR, I'm the Secretary General of SOLIDAR. We're a civil society network of progressive civil society organizations in 26 countries across the EU. We have some 57 members Europe-wide. That works to advance climate and environmental action together with social justice. So you could say that already in our vision statement, the one thing that drives us as a movement, we have just transition and the combination between climate and environmental action and social justice at the core of what we do and what we want to achieve. And to have, perhaps take a step back and touch on some of the aspects that Elizabeth was pointing out in the beginning that says something about the kind of policies we've been proposing that are not deep enough, not structured enough, or are not coordinated enough. And for all of this to happen, we need a more systemic approach. We need a systems kind of view on how we go about a just transition. Because it's not just about greening social policies or socializing green policies or whatever that would be in English. It is something more. It is something beyond the fact of merging two policy areas. In practice, this means the launch of a transformation project that is protecting our planet at the same time as we are safeguarding our health, promoting good green jobs, eradicating poverty and inequality, developing education and training for all, building affordable, sustainable, and accessible public transport, housing, and energy systems, promoting workers' rights, and strengthening social dialogue and collective bargaining, ensuring civil dialogue and democratic participation. And to do all of it hand in hand with our partners in the Global South. I think one thing that has been mentioned, but it's not perhaps been emphasized, is what needs to accompany these kind of transitions is also a kind of political revolution, if you want, or a systemic change on how we do policy, with dialogue embedded in the process from the beginning, embedded in the planning process, embedded in the implementation process, not as just a consultation kind of exercise or an information kind of exercise. I think the best way to build acceptance of our policies and the kind of drastic transformations we need is to include people, to actually sit down and discuss with them, dialogue with them, until you arrive at a solution that is jointly agreed on. And while what I just said in terms of the transformations needed in all these areas might sound like a utopian kind of wish list, it's already happening. I mean, we are already currently living a lot of the solutions that we need for our future sustainable and just lives. Our members in Europe and around the world are already doing this. It could be either through popular education, in sustainability practices in Croatia, the fight to ban pesticides in South Africa, or advancing social and circular economy activities in Belgium. And add to this the thousands and thousands of organizations and initiatives that are doing similar things. And they show us, all of us, that the transition is possible, that the future life we want is already existing right now. And these are the kind of initiatives and activities that need to be scaled up, supported, and facilitated by adopting this just transition framework at the European level. Because I am deeply convinced that there will be no transition, social or green, if you don't make this happen. They will not happen. And I think one of the key problems we've had before is exactly what you pointed to in the beginning, Elizabeth, that we thought that the green transition was something else than the rest of the policy areas that we're currently preoccupied with. That we could just do this and then it sort of would follow naturally, organically from the green initiatives themselves. While what we really need and what is at the heart of our understanding of what a just transition is this holistic, whole of society approach to merging these two agendas. And for this to happen, we can come back to a little bit later, but this would be the gist of it. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that, Mikael. So now I'll turn to Sébastien. Sébastien Treyer is the Executive Director of IDDRI, Institut de Développement Durable et des Relations Internationales. So, Sébastien, same question. What does it mean to have a just transition, and why is that relevant?
Thanks a lot. Maybe my provocative way of saying things is that I've never been a supporter of the just transition concept. Because to some extent it puts the, I mean, that's quite, by saying so, I'm quite aligned nevertheless with what has been said before, that the transition is not the only and maybe not the main factor of social problems in our union and in our different member states. And that there is a problem of blaming the transition for problems that are at a wider scale, and that we need to also tackle at that wider scale, which does not prevent from tackling with the things that our environmental policies might not be well designed, but there are other things that we cannot deal with. And I think one of the key things, I'm not a specialist of social policies, and there are specialists of those social policies around the table, but I think we need to face the fact that if there has ever been something like a social market economy model for continental Europe, that would be the social model in Europe. it's not functioning anymore. And we have a problem. At least we have an environmental policy in Europe. My take from the outside is that we don't have a social policy, and that this is a problem, and that we need. That's why I'm saying we need to work on our policy cycle, but we need also to put the political debate at the right scale, and this is what I think is extremely important. And so I just want to illustrate a little bit that leads us as a Paris-based think tank to try and see how we can really deal with the preparing the 2027 presidential election by trying to put the political debate at the right scale about issues of the social contract is broken, rather than saying we have a problem with the green transition. So trying to go into that direction. And to some extent, I believe what we need to discuss, and I come back to that afterwards, is not so much how could we put the just transition in the Envy Council, but how because the dominant narrative is now industrial policy. So this is where we need to lead the fight and put both social and environmental issues in the industrial policy rather than a reflection on ourselves. So I think there are lots of virtues in self-criticism. So I'm not trying to avoid that, but trying to put the priority of where we should put our energy as civil society and think tanks. So there is this thing about jobs where I think the just transition narrative could also lead to a capture by some sectors or some actors saying we are the losers of transition. I know of some protests in Germany, people saying the coal workers are actually quite privileged with respect to other layers of the population, and they are being helped by the federal government with a lot of money because of just transition schemes. Is that fair? So that's a question. I'm not German. I'm half German, but not knowing enough what's happening in Germany to know if that's right. I'm just thinking this is the type of question we also need to face. But further than that, we are faced in France, for instance, with the issue of the fact that we will have to face an increase in food prices if we want to have a food system that delivers on nutrition, environmental sustainability, and fairness. But then the idea that the retailers getting the prices down, that was the solution for social security on food that we chose in France and in Europe. This is not functioning anymore. So there are proposals, but these are left-wing proposals in Montpellier to do a social security for food at the local level, where there are. So I don't believe that this is going to work actually at a larger scale. But we need to think about how we can discuss a larger scale the social contract and the social protection for issues that are linked to our transformation also on the consumer side. And so that led us, and I'm going to finish on this, we believe that, at least in France, we need to talk to all the political spectrum. On the equivalent of the EPP in France, Les Républicains, there are some people saying we shouldn't just get away with the consumption, the idea that we need to have our social protection system rest on growth and on growth in consumption. So we need to discuss that, because we, on the right side of the political spectrum, we also have an issue. We also can be champions of sufficiency and discuss a little bit why consumption is not the ideal of our values, etc. And I want to reach out to those to discuss jointly the fact that the crisis that we are in is not just about the environment, it's also about our democratic processes that are not functioning, and in France it's very clear. People don't believe in democracy because they don't believe, there is the perception that there was a promise of emancipation, autonomy, that for 2 decades now it's been degrading. People don't believe that they are becoming more autonomous and more free to choose their own destiny. And that makes them very critical of any democratic process. And if we don't connect the dots between that democratic crisis, issues of security, I told about social security, but there are lots of issues of security. The fact that we link always prosperity with consumption, and that we link solidarity with jobs. There are lots of things that are not functioning there that are not just due to the green transition. And as a sustainability think tank based in Paris, we're not specialists of these big questions, but we need to play a game in that context. Because else, I believe if we don't structure the political debate in the right direction, we are going to have policy processes, but the voters are going to vote for other parties.
Thank you very much, Sébastien. So just to end the tour de table, I'd like to leave the floor now to Mikael, an EU representative from Clean Air Fund. Mikael, I'd love to hear your reflections.
Thank you, Chiara, and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, my name is Mikael Len. I'm the EU representative of the Clean Air Fund. And for those of you who don't know who we are a philanthropic organization which helps support action on global air pollution. And air pollution is one of those issues with inherent links with the health of our communities, but also the fight against the climate crisis, but with a very significant justice and equity component mixed in as well. Today in Europe, we still have the situation where 300,000 lives are cut short every year as a result of air pollution. Looking globally, this figure rises to some 7 million lives cut short as a result of air pollution. The main illnesses associated with these, dire figures include pulmonary and respiratory illnesses, cancers and strokes. Now, the World Bank estimates some $8.1 trillion of costs are stacked up as a result of air pollution. This includes healthcare costs, but also losses in terms of productivity. I mean, at the Clean Air Fund, when we speak about the question of justice, we more often than not look at it through an equity lens. As it's unsurprising, probably to all of you, that it's the most vulnerable and marginalized in our communities which tend to be the most exposed to air pollution and also bear the brunt of its health impacts. For instance, it's often the case that many low-income households are located next to very busy roads or next to industrial installations and simply do not have the means to relocate. We have many parts of Europe where households are still burning solid fuels at home in terms of coal and also wood. Often it's seen as the cheapest option, but it's at a very strong detriment to their health and the well-being of those around them. And we also look at equity through the lens of looking at occupations who are disproportionately exposed to air pollution. So, for example, construction workers. And we had really nice, I know it's not a European example, but we cooperated together with the Mahila Housing Trust and Help Delhi Breathe to work with women construction workers in Delhi and their communities to help drive awareness about the health impacts of air pollution, to work with local authorities to find solutions to reduce exposure, and also to help them access compensation on days lost due to high air pollution events, of which there are unfortunately many in Delhi. So ultimately, we really want to see a world where no matter where you're located, who you are, that you should have the right to breathe clean air. And when we look at that from a European perspective and the Green Deal and the policies that we put out, those kind of green solutions, those green products, we need to make sure that they're as accessible to everyone as possible, not only those who can afford it. I think I'll stop there. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikael. Very much in time also. So I'd like now to end this first round of questions, and now we can actually get a bit deeper into some more discussion around just transition. I'd like to follow the same order now. So, Ella, we were wondering, so during the European Conference for a Just Transition, the Belgian Presidency actually gathered both stakeholders and leaders together to discuss the social dimension of European Green Deal. And in the coming month also at the IEEP Summit, the future of European social agenda will be discussed as well. So my question here is, how do you think these summits can help consider the questions of a social Europe that is also green within planetary boundaries? And related to that, actually, what I was also wondering is, what do you think will be the biggest social challenges linked to this for the next 5, 20, 50 years from today?
Thank you, Chiara, for the questions. We indeed gathered a broad range of European stakeholders and representatives from all European member states and the European institutions during our conference the beginning of this month. And during the conference, we really wanted to discuss the social dimension of the European Green Deal because we wanted to collect messages for the next Commission that could feed into Council conclusions at the end of our Belgian presidency. The opinion that was mentioned by Maria, the ESC opinion, formed the basis of the discussions. It was already a first time discussed among environment ministers during the Informal Environment Council in January. And during the conference, there was a bigger focus on its governance aspects. Many stakeholders called, for example, for a strengthened European just transition policy framework, something that's also mentioned in the Commission communication on a 2040 climate target as well. But there was also focus on, for example, a just transition observatory, a commissioner for a just transition, and a proposal for a directive on just transition for the world of work. Next to that, stakeholders emphasized that we don't only need climate targets for 2040, but possibly also social targets for 2040. And as was already mentioned by others today, a lot of the competences of these policies that are linked to a just transition are part of the competence of different council formations. So we won't solve it in the Environment Council alone. We will need to combat ECOFIN, EBSCO, and many others. So they emphasize the need for breaking these silos and really integrate environmental and social policies. So in that regard, next month's La Hulp Summit, which will focus on the future of the European Pillar of Social Rights, should really be an opportunity to better link social challenges with also the social implications of the green transition. And then your second question on the biggest social challenges for the next years, I think it's again about better integrating environmental and social policies, because the social aspects of the green transition cannot just be an afterthought. This should be really part of the policy design when we are designing these transition policies. And in that regard, the update of the national energy and climate plans is a good opportunity, as well as the social climate plans that member states are about to design in the coming months. It's also something the Commission really recommends in its latest assessment of the draft national energy and climate plans. Secondly, about competitiveness and just transition, they really should be on the same level. When we look into the Commission communication for the 2040 climate target for the EU, they are both mentioned as crucial enabling conditions for achieving the recommended 90% reduction target. They also mention predictability, which will be key for investments, both in infrastructure, technology, and also in human capital. So therefore, a swift decision on the target will enable both a just transition and competitiveness. And thirdly, to end, a comprehensive analysis of the European Green Deal's funding gap, coupled with distributional impact assessment, will be really vital for understanding the required funding levels, but also where those funding will be needed the most. And in that regard, social and green conditionalities for funding, specifically for public funding, might be a good way forward.
Thank you very much, Ella. So now to follow the thread, and I'll ask now to Maria. So Maria, the ESC exploratory opinion on a just transition, which has also served the basis for the Belgian presidency work, this has already helped, as I said, shaping this work so far. But how do you think these ideas can be brought into the Commission's work on just transition?
By insisting all the time and knocking on their door and remind them that we are here. So basically, the opinion that we produced is focusing on 6 pillars, and it has recommendations for the Commission and on a European level, but also on a member state level. So the first pillar, it is what it was already mentioned, that we need a holistic and integrated approach on the policy making. We are still working on silos, not only in the Commission, also on the member states, also on the regional level. The hierarchy is very strict. It's very difficult to break, to collaborate, but it is crucial, not only on the planning of the coordination, but to create more and more synergies between the climate policies and the social policies. The Observatory of the Just Transition, I'm very happy you mentioned it. It was one of our recommendations there. And this is the opportunity precisely to onboard the civil society organizations and the stakeholders, and not only to tick a box on participation, but really to have a meaningful contribution there. Now, the second pillar is how to move to a sustainable economy that provides prosperity, and we have to redefine prosperity, within the planetary boundaries. And this is very much linked to the sustainable development. We need an EU sustainable development strategy. In this sense, it's important to redefine and reform the European semester so that environmental and social dimensions are on an equal foot with the economic dimensions. And also to take a closer look and to strengthen the social convergence framework. The third pillar is how to maintain and improve the European social model and welfare state. Here we would propose to have a directive on just transition to anticipate and manage the changes in the world of work, to actually foster active labor market policies, including job banks and job guarantee schemes, and also strengthen the social system that will support the people that will inevitably be affected by the transition. And it also, of course, means providing training and education, long life learning. Also, we have to tackle the skill shortages in the key sectors, and make sure that learning, upskilling, and reskilling reaches everyone, all ages and all social backgrounds. And of course, it was also mentioned by Mikael, quality public services, quality and affordable services. We need to move with the deployment of the renewable energies, and with a special focus on energy communities that will also onboard the civil society, and to rethink the renovation wave, because to some extent we will have to focus on delivering non-repayable grants to the people who cannot afford the renovation. And of course, public transport, it will be crucial for the transition. The fourth pillar is social dialogue, civil dialogue, and participation on local and regional authorities. We do not really have a lot of experience on an EU level on how to implement industry policies, but we do have experience on a local level, on a country level. So we need to build on this experience. The EU policies need to accompany these processes, and they need to make sure that the policy does not hurt them. No? And also, we do want to encourage the public companies as well to create their own just transition plans on a company level, always with the collaboration and the dialogue with the social partners. And the member states can take the opportunity to have just transition commissions, already onboarding the local stakeholders as well, so that they can all move forward together. The last pillar is businesses. Businesses are crucial there. All businesses, big, small, cooperatives, any kind of form of business. They need access to renewable energies, they need circular raw materials, and they need to play an active role in the transition. And the sixth pillar is the adequate investments. We know there are several economic tools, that they are not enough, neither in size nor in scope. So we propose to establish an EU financing strategy for just transition in the lines of the Next Generation EU, which is considered to be quite a successful tool. And of course, all the other policies and financial instruments that we have, we spoke about the IEEP, for example, they need to work, all of them, towards the same objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your insights. I'd like now to ask Mikael. So we know that actually SOLIDAR has quite some expertise on the topic, on just transition, and also some knowledge, quite extensive knowledge I would say, on the exploratory opinion. So about this, actually, how do you think that the ESC opinion and its proposed just transition policy framework fits with the EU's other work on just transition, for example, the just transition mechanism? And what else is needed, if you think so?
Well, thank you for the kind words as well. Let's see. We've been very much involved in the development of this opinion. So a lot of the proposals that was mentioned by Maria are also some of our heart matters. I think a lot of the new and what would be very innovative policy measures, like a Just Transition Commissioner or a comprehensive policy framework for just transition, would make just transition something else than what it is now. I mean, our main critique of the current policies that are named just transition, where you could easily say what Sébastien said, I'm not really a big fan of just transition, because it makes them smaller than what they should be. It makes them something very specific. I mean, the Just Transition Fund is severely underfinanced. It has a very, very limited focus, a narrow focus. If you look at for us, the main caveat of the European Green Deal is that it only mentions and make references to and has ambitions of integrating the social dimension, or making links with the action plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights, but it's not treated and designed and thought of and developed as a comprehensive agenda. It's not, we don't plan them together. We spoke about the LAHULPE conference, and we're also engaged on this issue, since social justice issues are at the heart of what our members are working on. And there is, from our side, it's being part of both the Just Transition initiatives that we very much and welcome, and are very happy that the Belgian Presidency is making their utmost to push for in this final stretch of the current college and the current parliament and council cycles, involved in this process, as well as the LAHULPE process. They don't really speak to each other. There's no real coordination between these two initiatives. They're not planned jointly, coherently. And this is not meant as a critique. I think it's a natural consequence of how these processes were designed. So what we need is to implement the EC opinion. I think it could be taken as a blueprint for a lot of things. Because what is needed is a shift in the mindset of how we do policy. I really do believe that this is what is needed. So we stop talking just about policy coherence as something of an exercise that requires time, and we do it on an officer level, or on intra-departmental or inter-institutional level, or as a working group in the parliament or whatever. It's not enough. We need to reduce emissions by 90%. We throw around these numbers sometimes as if they're easy to say. 90, I can say it a lot of times. It will be very, very hard to do. And if we don't do it with this kind of comprehensive approach, by involving all of us in this process, building the kind of support and enthusiasm and releasing the creativity needed to do this. I really like the expression in the morning session of we move from an economy of extraction to an economy of creativity. I mean, we need this kind of mind shift. We need to move beyond the silos that we're currently in. And the clearest expression of what will happen if you don't, perhaps, is the kind of blockage of Brussels we've seen in the past days. Because if you feel disillusioned, if you feel disenfranchised, if you feel not listened to, if you feel that you come with real concerns about how you're going to make life and ends meet, if you live in a local community where you just see everything around you die, and the last thing that is there are the farmlands that I've been working on with my family for the past generations, and nobody really makes this an issue. Not even the policies that are supposed to take care of you. I mean, we brand green policies as the thing that are going to take care of all of us, right? But if you feel left out, even from these policies, then I would also take my tractor and drive to Brussels. And that, in the long term, will yield something that we're not really talking about so often, but we like to talk about quite a lot, and that is how we then build the political majorities needed. Yes, we should talk across the aisles. We should speak to creative and constructive elements of the EPP and others. But we run a risk of having a parliament this fall that is much more than just the EPP. And if the ID and ECR gets a much stronger footing in the coming parliament, these kind of dialogues will be very, very difficult. So we're setting ourselves up for a very complicated process also from a democratic and political point of view if you don't get this right. So this complete shift in mindset, I think, is essential. And my final point is that currently, I mean, this might be obvious, but we're not alone in this world. And we design our EU policies as if we were. We are, one actor among many that needs to go about this transition. Some of them needs to be helped and supported and financed and inspired, and we need the technological transition and so forth. Some of them we need to engage in negotiations and dialogues with to change their own patterns of doing things. We had a colleague from the US, China, India, the major players of the global economy currently, Russia. We need to engage all of them in this to change their patterns of behavior. So we need to stop treating the just transition also as a local, regional event or issue for the EU. We need to look at it from a global just transition perspective as well.
Thank you very much, Mikael. Thank you for your insights. And now I'll ask Sébastien actually about industry and competitiveness. So as industrial policy continues to be a big focus of the Commission, what's your take actually on how to ensure that Europe aligns its objective with the social pillar? So.
Well, thank you for the question, because that's really what I think is the emphasis that I think we need to have, at least from the environmentalist movement, to really see how we can integrate environmental and social objectives in the way that the industrial policies are defined. I've been looking at the Antwerp Declaration on the industrial deal, which is some part of the European industry declaring their candidate for a successor to the Green Deal. And it's scary on the environmental side, because you don't have a strong commitment to environmental ambition. There are some things about the social dimension in the Antwerp Declaration, but it's really not sufficient to my standards. And I think these are the things that we need to do. I think we need to integrate the ESC opinion in the industrial deal. I mean, you have a lot of your recommendations that are about how do you define a reconversion policy at the regional scale and make it consistent with the cohesion fund at the European scale. And this is, I think, something very important. Until now, we have the impression that the just transition is targeting some sectors that need to change. Coal, steel, maybe agriculture. But actually, all sectors need to change. And I think that's the political moment in which we are, not just for environmental reasons. The project for the European Union is to have a reconversion policy at the scale of every sector and every territory in Europe. And that's massive. And I really would like to it's more an assumption that's something that I can demonstrate, but it's actually not just because of the environment. We have a competitiveness problem in all sectors, not because of the environment that we put the environmental constraint, but because our workforce the cost of labor is higher here than in other countries. So there are things that we need to face. We have also the idea that I think Elizabeth mentioned that in the beginning, that labor is being substituted by capital, by physical capital. So we have the issue of digital, of mechanization, etc. So jobs are disappearing. So we have a lot of questions about the industrial policy that needs to be dealing with all these issues. And that's about reskilling, of course, putting the social dimension in it, but a lot of other things that we need to discuss. And I think that's where, as environmental civil society and think tanks, we need to participate to that conversation, but really think about what it means in all sectors. One thing that I think we need to put on the table is that very often we are supposed to ask, to demonstrate that the green transition scenario for the different sectors is producing more jobs than now, or more decent jobs than now. That's very difficult. I believe we shouldn't promise that. We've done that in France on Brittany and the dairy sector, etc. What we can do is to probably reduce the loss of jobs, but not produce more jobs than now. So we need to compare to the business as usual. And I don't believe that DG GROW or the signatories of the Antwerp Declaration have a business as usual scenario that works for jobs, for decent jobs and for income for everybody. So we need to really also think about what is the no transition scenario and how can we also discuss that in the public debate. Last thing, it's about finance and investment. I think that has been mentioned before, but the Social Climate Fund and the Just Transition Fund are not enough for helping. And funds are not enough. There are also a lot of other things, but this is not enough. And this is really something very important. And I will concur with something that Mikael has been saying at the beginning. We're working with sustainability think tanks in Africa, and their green industrialization process depends a lot on how we can build industrial ecosystems that are transboundary and not just within Europe, but also including players from Senegal, from Namibia, from Kenya in our supply chains and in our industrial ecosystem, and considered also as people who are innovate and can capture value, and not consider that as a zero-sum game. This is very complicated. This adds even more a problem in the political debate, but I think among ourselves we need to really put that also as part of the equation, because if we are socially fair in Europe, but if the world is continuing to be so unfair, that is not sustainable, that is not viable even politically and economically.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your reflections, Sébastien. And now I'd like to turn to Mikael, last but not least. So today we specifically heard about the right to clean air in the morning. And I'd like to ask you, how do clean air solutions intersect with the support for a just transition in the European Union? And with respect to that, how do the social impacts of these policies and their level of society acceptability factor into this dynamic?
Brilliant, thank you, Chiara. So I guess when speaking about clean air solutions, I could give some examples of our work in two sectors which prioritize most of our time through our European program, notably clean heating and clean transport. I'll start off in Poland, because quite a lot of our funding goes to this specific country within Europe. And in Poland, some 2.5 million households are still burning coal and wood today, which is responsible for around 86 to 90% of so-called PM 2.5 emissions. It's a very harmful air pollutant in Poland. And having family from the south of Poland and traveling there regularly, there are days in winter where you can literally taste the air. It is still a very big problem. The government has put together a clean air program, which I think is only one of its kind in Europe, which is a subsidy scheme to help households exchange their heating systems to a cleaner alternative. And there's three layers to this subsidy, depending on the income level of the household. And for low-income households, one can get up to 100% of the net costs of the exchange of the boiler and the installation. Now, overall, this scheme has been in place for a few years now and is working quite well. We funded some work with the European Clean Air Centre, which did some modelling showing that by 2030, based on current trajectories of cleaning heating systems, up to 30 million Poles will breathe clean air. Currently, it's around 2 million, so that's a 15-fold increase. That's pretty big. And they model that some 21,000 deaths, which could be prevented prematurely. Now, the scheme isn't perfect. I mentioned the term net costs, coverage of net costs. But often for low-income households, it's impossible to cover even the VAT, whether it's 6% or whatever it is on top. There's also fundamental issues with regards to outreach about the scheme to low-income households and helping them, as various cultural reasons, also ingrained in certain coal regions as well with regards to the change of dynamics. So it's not easy, but it is possible to clean your air fast, and I think this scheme could be a kind of beacon of good practice for other countries in the region to follow suit. In terms of such affordability and acceptability, and one other sector we focus on, as I mentioned, is clean transportation systems. And notably, Minister Maron mentioned earlier today low emission zones, and we're trying to do our bit to promote their implementation as well. Today in Europe, there's about 320 low emission zones in place, and more coming online soon. There's clear environmental benefits to these low emission zones here in Brussels. Bruxelles Environnement published a study recently saying that basically there's been a reduction of 30% of air pollution along the main transport arteries within Brussels over the past 4 years or so as a result of the low emission zone. See, as a cyclist and as a pedestrian, I know there's definitely still some room for improvement, but it's definitely a positive step. So I would just like to say, whilst the benefits in terms of health and reduction in pollution is important, I think a lot of these schemes can result in direct impact on people's daily behaviours, how they drive the car, when they drive the car, if they drive the car, and this can, of course, resulting in some quite large pushback. We saw that in London with the ultra-low emission zone rollout, and it's a real issue of communication and acceptance. We're really happy to be cooperating with the IEEP right now on precisely this point, so looking at what kind of social considerations need to be put in place when designing low emission zones, looking at case studies of 5 particular cities in Europe. I won't mention them all because I think I'll get them all wrong, but Stockholm, Milan, Brussels, Warsaw and Sofia, I think, are the 5. And we also have a new cities program where we're specifically working a bit deeper with some of the cities that I've just mentioned in terms of looking at how to work with those who are at risk of both mobility and energy poverty as well, and how we can design policies that can definitely support their integration and their them benefiting the systems put in place. So, those are just some examples I wanted to put forward.
Thank you very much, Mikael. And thank you all for this second round of interventions. Now, I'd like to leave the floor to you. So, if you have questions that you put on Slido, by all means, share and please keep at it. In the meantime, we're also going to collect some questions from the audience with the mic. So, Elena will be on mic duties and she'll be supporting us. So, if you want to intervene from the room, please raise your hand. Yes, I already see a couple of hands. Yes, Elena. And yes, and then if there are some questions on Slido, then I will pass the floor to my colleague from Zoe, Christina Miller. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Bayomi from FEANT, the Federation of Homeless Service Providers. And I'm an energy poverty policy officer working on a socially fair energy transition. And I have a question to Ella. You mentioned that you are working on social conditionality and social impact assessment, which would be really important regarding the Green Deal policies. And I would like to ask if you could share a bit more information on this, because it seems very promising, and I would be interested on a bit of details regarding that. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Maybe to clarify, I'm not myself working on a social impact assessment, but in my opinion, it should be something that we should do at European level when we design the impact assessments for example, the upcoming 2040 climate target. It has a broad impact assessment, but it should also more broadly integrate and go deeper on the social implications of that target. There are some elements in the impact assessment, but it should be more concrete and with more specific information also for the member states and how it will impact different regions, different sectors, to better inform also the decision-making process and the upcoming 2040 climate target framework that we will still have to decide upon. So I'm sorry, that's not really an answer to your question, but yeah.
Yes, a very quick reaction, and then we go to, yes, to Man in Green.
Yeah, sorry for insisting on this, but the other part of my question was on the social conditionality of EU funding that you also mentioned, and that's also a very promising thought. Thanks.
It is indeed something that also came up during a European conference on just transition. It's also something that's mentioned in the ESC opinion. And I think it's really something we should look into, because public funding is, how can I say it? It should be used well targeted. And if we use public funding to finance the transition, it's important that both green and social conditionalities are attached to it. For example, when you look to state aid, it's important when there's funds going to industry that they also are financing or investing in workers, in skills, in training for workers. So that's a bit what I mean with social conditionalities. And it's the same for green conditionalities, that those funds should be well targeted for our environmental and climate goals.
Thank you very much, Ella, for your answer. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Philip Tulkens from the European Commission, DG Research and Innovation. I have a question that is a little bit technical, maybe, but I would like to know whether you think that the states have enough data on the wealth of people and how it is distributed, so that researchers can look precisely at how to focus best the support so that it goes to those who need it. In some countries in Europe, in Denmark, in Finland, this is well developed. In Norway, it's very developed as well. But my impression is that in EU member states, and I'm Belgian, and I know that in Belgium the situation is much more complex. So that's a technical question. What are your research needs to propose actually more targeted support? And the other question is a bit more political. In a recent conference, not that recent, on Beyond Growth, Philippe Lamberts, the Green MEP, said that he heard about the just transition mostly in circles of rich people, as if it would be a good way to make sure it's not that just, or it would not happen so fast. What do you think about this affirmation?
So, with respect to the first question, do we have a volunteer in our panel? Yes, I see both. We can go first with Sébastien, then, yes, Elisabeth.
No, sorry, because I mean, I can just know about a little bit an answer in France, and that might not be enough for your question on data. But what I know is that on low emission zones, you really can find easily some data on how to support, how you can target those policies to help those who would suffer most. So around Paris or Strasbourg, etc. There are consultants actually who have a very good database that they can cross with public authorities to try and say which are the diesel cars that are used by specific entrepreneurs that can't change to electrification of their vehicle, and should we target some specific support to them. So this is a French example, just to say that I think we have a lot of data, and the question is not so much to ensure that the public authorities have them, but that we can really build the translation of that data into something that can help the design of the policy to support those who are most in need. But that might be, again, a French example that is not transferable to other member states.
Thank you. Elisabeth.
Thanks. I could talk all day about indicators, so I will try to keep this precise. The short answer, I think, is no, for me. And this has to do with the fact that I think that the data that we have on the environmental side versus on the social side is unequal. And I think the wealth and richness of the environmental data that we have is also largely thanks to the European Environment Agency, also state level, national level environment agencies, also the huge growth in local environmental quality monitoring, citizen science monitoring, all this kind of thing. There's been a huge movement and growth in this on the environmental side over the last couple of decades in Europe. I mean, largely thanks to maybe people in this room, but also national governments in the EU for championing this. And we don't have the same type of information on social topics. And I think crucially there, the issue is also on outcome or kind of lived experience. So if you look at how we monitor funds, if we look at, for example, the RRF, we as Zoe were really involved in trying to ensure that there were what I would call outcome-oriented indicators around measuring the funds, or impact-oriented indicators that tell us more than about how many people were funded or how many places were funded or how much meters of cable was funded, but rather how do you know something about how people's lives changed? And I think on that side, on the social side, we're missing a lot of information, which makes it harder for us to understand the same depth of impact on environment and social. You asked about the first question only. I can also speak to the second. I think I would try, but I would also pass it to someone else.
Thank you. Actually, we'll get back to the second question. So to complete the round, I think Mikael has something to say about this, the first question.
No, just very briefly, I think one of the main proposals is the Observatory for Just Transition, and that is also intended to tackle some of it. It's based on the understanding that there is no I mean, the correlation between environmental policies and social needs are not there. We don't really know currently. But there's a lot of, I don't know, but I also am a bit confused, so you must excuse me, because I think there's a lot of data on inequality, right? Or inequalities, I mean, what it looks like in the different countries, the access to social rights, generally speaking, is quite abundant as well. I mean, the coverage of the welfare state, how easily accessible they are, how affordable they are, social security, social insurances, all these things we have. We could always have more, I suppose. I mean, I'm not a researcher, but there is quite an abundance of these kind of data. I mean, we use some of it when we argue for more. So, yeah, we could perhaps benefit from more, but there is a possibility of putting these things alongside each other and see what measures would yield the best results in both areas, I think. But the observatory is, the proposal for an observatory comes from the identified need for monitoring this more coherently and substantially.
Thank you, Mike.
Then I also want to comment on Philip Lambert's friends.
Yes, so about that. So thank you, Mikael, for that. And since time is actually running out and we have to be sharp, so very quick reactions, 2 reactions to the second questions, and then we'll get 1 question from Slido. So.
Can I start?
Okay.
Because
and
I
then.
have it on?
Yes. Okay.
No, thanks. It was a fun question, and I think maybe it has to do with Philip Lambert's friends and his circles. If he only speaks about this with rich people, then yeah, I don't know. Maybe he meets a lot of rich people. I don't know rich people, so I wouldn't know. But I think part of the more serious side of that question lies with what Sébastien said before. I think a lot of the crises that we're currently talking about now, as if they were of the transition or due to the transition or will be happening because of the transition, is the wrong way to look at it. And if you see the just transition needs from that angle, the abundance of people from all walks of life speaking about the need for a just transition are everywhere. From trade union movements, from poverty organizations, from racialized communities, everyone speaks about the different aspects of a comprehensive policy framework for a just transition that speaks about, reducing poverty, reducing inequalities, the need to tackle geographical, regional, intra-city injustices and inequalities. So in that sense, I think a lot of the issues that we need to tackle with a comprehensive just transition policy framework, even if people wouldn't frame it like that because nobody normal would, the different aspects of that policy is covered by the insecurity that Europe and the world is living every day.
So I'd like to have just 1 very quick reaction, if you have.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to say a lot of the same things, but with less of a cheap dig on Philippe. I think the issue with the framing is that it just doesn't say anything. Like, just transition is an umbrella term. What we need to be talking about is the specific, what people are talking about is the specific issues that they're facing.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So we have 1 question from Slido that Christine Miller from Zoe Institute can read aloud.
Yes,
Thank you,
there are a
Christine.
few questions, and I'm just going to read the top voted one here. But if we have more time, maybe I can add another.
We have time just for 1 question.
Okay.
Choose wisely.
So I think this can go to any of the panelists. Are there good examples of just transition programs, and what are the lessons learned, and what made them successful?
Who want to take the floor? Who's volunteering this? Can I call some of the speakers who didn't speak before?
I have a list. I do know, really, I do have a list, so I'm sorry I'm spending time. The list that I will not find, it comes from Estonia, it comes from Germany, it comes from different areas in Spain, and basically the success story is the collaboration between the administration, the social dialogue, and the civil dialogue. When you put everyone together, people with the knowledge and people with the money and people with the administrative tools to put forward the transition, then we have success stories. So it's all about dialogue.
Thank you. There's, yes, 1 other quick reaction.
Yeah, I will keep it brief because I don't have the list in front of my brain. But a couple of years ago, Zoe did a big project analysing all of the recovery and resilience plans. And we've made a series of country profiles of the ones that we did. And in each of those, there are success stories. So if you're looking for some national level specific examples of good work happening, there's a plethora of them. Just because I can't spit them out right now doesn't mean they don't exist. Two that I would highlight are in Portugal and in Spain. The one in Spain is related to territorial plan around a coal region in transition. The one in Portugal is related to, again, a regional plan around climate resilience, specifically around forestry management, managing forest fires, building community ownership over this, that it's the investment in community governance models over this, and local businesses in the same process. So I obviously don't have all the details in the front of my brain, but you can find those on those country profiles, and they do exist.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So I'd like to close now the floor to the questions and have a lightning round. So I'd like to get a 30 seconds message from each of you, one key takeaway from this session today. And I'll reshuffle and start with Mikael. It's 30 seconds session.
Yeah,
seconds.
Yes. I was waiting for it to, okay. Okay, I will repeat myself because this is the main message. And I've learned that if you repeat things enough, then maybe people remember it. We need a just transition policy framework that is comprehensive and that breaks the current understanding of what just transition is. We need it to include industrial policy, trade policy, agricultural policy, social policy, and environmental and climate policies, of course. I mean, we need this comprehensive policy framework that leaves no one behind, but it also brings people in. Huh?
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Mikael. So, Ella.
I will be short. So, since people are at the heart of the transition, its social implications should be at the same level as competitiveness.
Thank you, Mikael. Michael.
Yeah, from my side, just wanted to highlight that point of urgency in respect of the climate crisis. And if we want to move fast, we just really need to have everyone on board. So whatever green products or solutions or policies we put forward, they need to be as accessible and as acceptable to everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Sébastien.
Yeah, on my side, I think I heard something that is, I think we would need to discuss further, which is how we build political coalitions. I saw social players and environmentalists build interesting coalitions in France, for instance, the Pact for the Power of Living, that translates strangely into English, but that's really not about green transition, it's about what do we want? It's the power to have a good life. And so these coalitions are very important. They are, for the moment, not right enough politically, but I think we also need to see, and that's a real puzzle to me, what would be the political coalition to bring the social policy higher on the EU agenda, to make it really something, a competence, is that the English word, of the European Union, and not just something that is left to member states, because I believe we are not going to have a solution if that's the statu quo, that there is no real social policy at the EU level.
Thank you, Sébastien. Maria.
Okay, this morning we heard from the previous panel, from Jan, that fear is mobilizing people, and we saw it in COVID. Fear is also stabilizing people, immobilizing them if it's too much. And this is what we need to manage. Uncertainty, fear, we need safety nets for the people so that all together we can move forward. And it's not that we need less environmental policies, but we need to work to step up the social policies that go along with them. And ever since the beginning of the process, the European Economic and Social Committee was calling for a green and social deal. And we have been repeating it all the time, and we will continue doing so.
Thank you very much. I'll now ask Elizabeth to very quickly wrap up and conclude. You have 2-3 minutes top.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take a page out of, first of all, thanks for the really engaging and interesting discussion from all the panelists, and also for the questions that came from the audience, and I also appreciate the provocative questions and responses. I'm going to take a page out of the book of Namica from IDDRI. Probably some people in the room know her. At the end of the Belgian Just Transition Conference, she had this wonderfully catchy phrase where she said the green transition needs to be fast, fair, and funded. And I thought, yeah, bam, it does. And so I was thinking, okay, can I come up with something while we're here? What does the just transition need? And I think the just transition needs to be systemic, sexy, and sustained. Systemic, talked a lot about root causes. Also, others on the panel talked a bit about this. And this is not just about policies that deal with both issues at the same time, but it's also about social policies, social funding, social challenges for being seen for what they are, and not just about in the context of the green transition. This is about social infrastructure, this is about our social institutions, this is about our care system, this is about our education system, this is about our jobs, et cetera, in their own rights, and the root causes of what's creating injustice there, also in the context of the green transition, but not only. Sexy, we need to move past talking about acceptability and start talking about a future, a positive future that people are actually happy about, that they feel good about, that they imagine themselves in, that they want. The future we want is this expression. Of course, there's UN documents that have called this. Other countries have done citizen participation exercises where they framed it like this. We need to be talking about what people want, actually actively want, and not just what's acceptable. And last, sustained. Well, it needs to happen, it needs to exist, it needs to continue, but also it needs to be planned and it needs to be long-term, and we need to know that we're in it step by step along the way towards that positive future. So if we want that just transition, we need to be planting just transition trees.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you all the panelists. And this is the end of the Just Transition session, so please stay with us. We're having also the closing ceremony in this room as well. So it's been great to have you here, and thank you for this very enriching and challenging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much again to all the panelists. I would like to ask you for your patient 2 minutes. We are waiting for the other breakout rooms to come here.